Transaction declined. The words on that credit card terminal felt like a laser beam burning a hole through my reputation. I stood frozen in the middle of a high-end Italian restaurant while the waiter politely cleared his throat. Across the table sat three of my most important clients. Just minutes ago, I was bragging about my record-breaking quarter and my plans to buy a mountain vacation home. I had insisted on picking up the $1,200 check just to prove I was the big shot I claimed to be. "I'm sorry, sir," the waiter said, his voice just loud enough for the table to hear. "Do you have another card?" I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew exactly why it was declined. It wasn't a bank error. It was because I had reached the absolute end of my rope. I had 7 credit cards in my wallet, and every single one was maxed out. I was 30 years old, earning a 6-figure salary, and I was completely, utterly broke. Have you ever felt that cold pit in your stomach when you know a payment is about to fail, but you pray for a miracle anyway? To understand how I ended up in that restaurant with a crushing sense of shame, you have to understand where I started. I grew up in a family where money was fine, but never abundant. My parents drove used cars and rarely ate out. When I graduated and landed a corporate job in the city with a starting salary of $85,000, I felt like I had won the lottery. To a 22-year-old, $85,000 felt like an infinite amount of money. I moved into a studio apartment in a trendy neighborhood and stopped looking at price tags. But the problem with trendy neighborhoods is the comparison trap. My coworkers wore designer watches, my neighbors drove luxury German SUVs. In my mind, I wasn't just an employee, I was a rising star. And a rising star needed to look the part. It started small. I got a high-end gym membership that cost more than my parents' monthly grocery bill. I started wearing tailored suits and going out for $50 dinners every single night because I was too busy to cook. I told myself it was an investment in my career. I believed that if I wanted to be at the top, I had to look like I already belonged there. I was buying things I didn't need to impress people I didn't even like. I thought I was building a brand, but I was actually building a cage. If you suddenly started making a high salary, do you think you'd be disciplined enough to keep your old lifestyle? Or would you feel the pressure to level up like I did? By my 3rd year, I got a promotion. My salary jumped to $115,000. Instead of saving that extra money or paying down the small balances I'd started to carry, I doubled down on the lifestyle. I moved into a luxury 1-bedroom apartment for $3,200 a month. I also leased a brand new BMW for $750 a month. And that didn't even include the massive insurance premiums. This is when the credit cards became a necessity rather than a convenience. My fixed expenses, rent, car, and utilities were consuming 60% of my take-home pay. After the rising star lifestyle costs, like the expensive haircuts and the weekend trips to look successful on social media, I was left with nothing. I opened my first premium card for the travel rewards. I promised myself I would pay it off every single month. Then came a friend's bachelor party in Vegas. I didn't have the cash for the flights and the hotel, so I put it all on the card. I'll pay it back with my bonus, I rationalized. But when the bonus came, I didn't pay the card. Instead, I used it to buy a luxury watch I'd been eyeing for months. I only paid off half the card balance. That was the turning point. Once I became comfortable carrying a $2,000 balance, it was very easy to let it grow to $5,000, then $10,000. The banks weren't rewarding my success. They were betting on my failure. Be honest, if your bank kept raising your credit limits even though you were secretly struggling, would you take it as a sign of success or a warning that you're in a trap? By the time I hit my late 20s, I was caught in a cycle of minimum payments. Every month, I sent $1,500 to the banks, but $1,200 of that was just interest. I was paying a $1,500 monthly tax just to keep my debt from exploding. I was $45,000 in credit card debt. I owed $30,000 on my car, and I had exactly $400 in my savings account. I was one missed paycheck away from a total collapse. The stress was constant. I couldn't sleep. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, thinking it was a debt collector. But I kept up the act. I'd go to work, put on my expensive suit, and pretend I was a millionaire. The collapse happened in waves. It started with a notice of default on my car lease. I had skipped 2 payments to cover a security deposit for a group trip that I couldn't afford to miss because I didn't want my friends to know I was broke. I thought I could catch up,
but my interest rates had spiked to 29% because the bank saw my rising debt levels. Suddenly, my minimum payments jumped by another $400. I began shuffling money like a magician. I'd use one card for groceries just to keep enough cash in my bank account to pay the minimum on another card. It was a high-stakes game of Tetris, and I was rapidly running out of space. If you were in my position, seeing the numbers go red every single month, would you have confessed to someone, or would you have kept hiding it like I did? Then came that night at the restaurant. After the card was declined, I had to do something soul-crushing. I asked my clients to wait while I stepped outside.
My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I opened my banking app, hoping for a miracle. Every account was at its limit. I had $12 left in my checking. I had to go back inside and lie. I told them a fraudulent charge had frozen my account. One client, an older man who had clearly seen this before, looked at me with pure pity. He didn't say a word. He just pulled out his card and paid the bill. The silence on the ride home was the loudest thing I've ever heard. The next morning, the house of cards finally fell. I walked to my parking spot to find my BMW was gone. It had been repossessed in the middle of the night. I stood there in the empty spot, holding my briefcase, and just started laughing hysterically. I had no car, no credit, no savings, and $78,000 in high-interest debt. My rent was due in 3 days, and I was completely broke. I had spent years trying to look rich, and it had finally made me poor. If you had to look your boss in the eye and explain why you couldn't pay for a business dinner you insisted on hosting, how would you even begin to recover your dignity? The final blow came when HR called me in. The credit card companies had started calling my office, threatening to garnish my wages. In the finance world, being financially unstable is seen as a massive liability. They restructured my role, which was a polite way of saying they demoted me. They removed me from client-facing duties. My commission potential vanished, and my income dropped by 40% overnight. The game was over. I couldn't hide it anymore. The following weeks were a blur of shame. I couldn't afford my apartment, so I broke the lease and faced even more penalties. I sold everything I owned. The watch, the designer suits, the furniture I'd bought on credit. Everything went on online marketplaces for pennies on the dollar. At 30 years old, I packed my entire life into 6 cardboard boxes and moved back into my parents' guest room. Seeing the worry and disappointment on my father's face was harder than any debt collector's call. I had spent years trying to prove I was above my middle-class roots, only to end up back in my childhood bedroom with a $78,000 anchor around my neck. Could you handle the ego hit of moving back into your childhood bedroom after living at the top of the corporate world? I spent the next 3 years living like a monk. I took a boring entry-level accounting job where nobody cared about my suits or my car. Every single cent I earned went to the dead. I canceled every subscription. I traded my smartphone for a flip phone to save $80 a month. I delivered pizzas on Friday and Saturday nights. It took 38 months of soul-crushing effort. I didn't go on a single vacation. I didn't eat at a restaurant. I just worked. When I finally logged into my account and saw that $0 balance, I didn't celebrate. I didn't go out for a drink. I just sat down on the edge of the bed and cried. I was finally free. That nightmare taught me 3 lessons I will carry for the rest of my life. First, income is not wealth. You can earn $200,000 a year, but if you spend $201,000, you are poor. Wealth is what you keep, not what you show off. Second, the minimum payment is the most expensive product in the world. If you can't pay for it in cash today, you cannot afford it on a card. Period. No exceptions. Finally, stop trying to impress people who don't care about you. I ruined my life for friends who disappeared the moment I couldn't afford a $100 dinner. Your ego is a luxury you cannot afford when you're in debt. What is one thing in your life right now that you're only paying for to look good in front of others? If you lost your job tomorrow, would that item be worth the stress it's putting on your future? Today, my life looks very different. I drive a 10-year-old Toyota that I bought with cash. My apartment is modest, but it's paid for. I don't owe a single dollar to anyone.
For the first time in a decade, I can finally breathe. I might not look like a rising star anymore, but I've never felt more successful. I'm sharing this because I know there are people out there right now who are doing exactly what I did. You're shuffling cards, you're losing sleep, and you're terrified of that transaction declined message. If you've ever felt the pressure to keep up with the people around you, or if you've managed to dig yourself out of a hole like mine, I want to hear your story in the comments. How do you handle the pressure to look successful when the numbers tell a different story? Let's talk about it below. Your experience might be the wake-up call someone else needs to hear today.